The topic I want to lead with today, this is Andrew Duncan, the Duncan Duo team, LPT Realty, at the Duncan Duo, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook. The topic I'm going to talk about today, I have talked about it before, but it's fresh on my mind because I showed property to two different celebrities this week. And it's interesting because you see the reality TV shows that sometimes they're very staged, that sometimes kind of incorporate, what happens in a real estate transaction with celebrities. And the second caveat to that is that you see things on social media, and then, it's what happens in reality is different than what happens in reality TV. But I do want to kind of talk to our audience a little bit because I want to explain some of the differences and the things that are unique. And when you're working with really good agents, and both the properties I showed this week, the agents on the other side were awesome. But I kind of want to give you a little bit of insight into how things operate a little bit differently. So typically in luxury real estate, a lot of the times, you're requiring a proof of funds. So if you're going to show a $5 million house, the seller may very well want to know that the buyer has the capability of qualifying. So, it may say things like, pre-approval or proof of funds required before showing is approved. When you're dealing with celebrities and people that are, pretty commonly known to have the money, there's a resistance because they obviously don't want that information being leaked, or they don't want that financial statement somehow getting copied or put online. The average normal person probably maybe doesn't really care if I send a proof of funds to someone to buy a property, because I do it all the time. We're constantly buying stuff, and someone leaks that. I'm not really worried about it. I'm proud that I've built what I've built. But celebrities, on the other hand, are much more private. They don't want that business out in the street. So typically you're having to disclose maybe the name of the person, or at least some sort of hint about who the person is, to the other agent to get them to say, okay, yeah, you're right, I don't need a proof of funds. Generally speaking, that's one unique caveat to working with celebrities that are known to have the money, that it's not hard to verify that they have the capability of buying the property, is that they're not going to want to provide that document. And there can be a little bit of an ego involvement too, where if their name doesn't work, then that can bother them. For example, if someone's famous and known and on TV, or professional athlete, and it's not hard to figure out what their contract was, and somebody's trying to, force a proof of funds, that person can get very offended. It can bother them because it just can. There's a certain element involved with, I've been in the public eye, it's not hard to figure out that I have the capability of doing this. So that's one unique caveat. I think a second unique thing is that there's more hands involved in the process with some celebrities. Now, there are some celebrities and athletes that are very much involved with their money. They control their money. They still write their checks. They still look at their statements. They're very much involved in it, especially if there's some sort of financial celebrity or someone in business that's a known, entrepreneur. But in other instances, like is probably more the norm for professional athletes, they're not going to be involved in a real estate transaction that doesn't involve some of their people. They're going to have attorneys and agents and oftentimes spouses that may manage that. And so you've got a little bit more people involved in the process. In a typical real estate transaction, the buyer and seller are the ones that are going to be kind of involved with negotiating and making the decisions and answering things. And sometimes if they're younger, or a first-time home buyer, a parent or relative maybe assisting them, a spouse, those types of things. When you're dealing with a higher net worth celebrity that isn't involved in their money, a lot of times you're going to be communicating with other people. The celebrity or athlete may go and look at the house and they may thumb it up, but then you're dealing with their business people, their attorneys, their agents, spouses in some instances. It's a much different process because you've got extra people looking at things. So it can cause things to sometimes take a little bit of extra time. It can cause things to be a little bit more complicated, some of the legalities and terms and privacy protections. And so, I remember at one point we've worked with, athletes and celebrities, on numerous occasions. And I've had the instance where the attorney or the agent is asked that the original contract be, destroyed or not copied or duplicated, simply because they didn't want that turning into an eBay auction, and they definitely didn't want the knowledge slipping out about what it is that they're buying. They didn't want, someone knowing that they were thinking about buying a particular property, or they had an offer on it, or that it was even theirs. The other thing that you often see, and it's a little less common in Florida, but you'll often see celebrities or athletes buy homes either in land trusts or LLCs that don't put their name on it. They want to try and hide or set up a layer, whether it's an out-of-state LLC where you can't figure out who the managing member is, or they want to set a layer up so their privacy can be protected for at least a period of time. Much more common in Los Angeles and New York with the privacy protections than here, but One of the reasons why you don't see it as often here is because we have a homestead exemption. And our homestead exemption is unique for a couple of reasons. One, it lowers and reduces property taxes and puts caps on them. And certainly now that there's a chance of abolishment of property taxes, potentially a year or two down the line in our state. The second reason, that if it's a primary residence, it's protected from creditors, a lot of creditors. If it's an investment property, then it can be penetrated. So you'll sometimes see, individual names. Like, for example, when Derek Jeter owned his home on Davis Island, it was in his individual name. Again, it was part of a protection. Your domicile, your homestead residence has property tax benefits, but then it can't be penetrated by anyone but the IRS. So, for example, if you have a really expensive home and you put it in an LLC, that could potentially be pierced by a creditor. If you have a primary residence, the IRS is about the only, of course, you got to pay your property taxes, but the IRS is about the only place that can come after your primary residence. So there are a lot of people that use those two things specifically in our state. So that's generally, unless there are ways to do a trust where it can be done that way, but generally you're seeing those individual names because it is a protection on money. So they have to debate the tax treatment or the asset protection versus the property tax benefits versus the privacy. So those are a couple of other things. I think, again, the more higher profile the celebrity, the more intricate you have to be in terms of coordinating the showings. So, for example, if someone is, relatively well known, but not something that, is going to hit TMZ, it's a little bit different than if you're, someone so highly famous that just you walking a property and being seen in a neighborhood could turn into a social media post or a news story or a TMZ post. So, when you're really high level celebrity, similar to going to a restaurant, you're trying to go in the back door, you're trying to go at certain times, your periods of time where you're trying to avoid being seen, so the higher the profile, the more you have to try and set up a showing process that keeps it private, that doesn't allow as many people to notice or see. In Tampa Bay, we're fortunate that a lot of our luxury stuff is in single family homes. So it's a lot easier to shelter that, right? You're pulling up to a driveway, you walk out, you go inside. Places like New York City, it's more challenging because a lot of times, especially if they're in Manhattan and they're looking at apartments, they're going to walk into a place and could run into 7 people before they get to the unit that they want to see. So in places like New York City, it's not uncommon to have somebody that wants to see an apartment at an odd hour if they're a celebrity or famous because they want to control or minimize the number of people that could see them. So last but not least, again, depending on how high profile the celebrity is, there are plenty of them that buy vacation properties and very expensive homes that they don't even go and see in person. They're simply relying on their people and professionals. They're relying on video or FaceTime. They simply own many homes and they simply buy one and even choosing not to go and visit it until after they've bought it. So those are some caveats to how you work with celebrities, professional athletes, a lot more about confidentiality, more privacy protections, some extra hands kind of in that process, some extra people watching out for liability and privacy. Again, it's just unique. And I have run into it over the years, where you have an agent on the other side that isn't as experienced with, working in that space, or a seller that tries to force a pre-approval or a proof of funds on somebody that you can look up their contract and know that they have plenty enough money to buy this property, clear how much they made on their last movie, or, they signed a 3-year, $50 million contract 2 years ago. Either they didn't know the person or didn't do their research, or they still try and hold the line on their rule of a pre-approval or proof of funds. And that can, unfortunately, with certain people, blow up the deal or cause them not to want to see it because now they're offended that you're going to make them call their financial advisor for a statement when it's not hard to figure out that they have the money. So hopefully that's a unique insight and helpful for people out there wanting to know what it's like working with celebrities. But the one thing the last thing that I'll say is all of the celebrities and athletes that we've ever worked with have been incredible. There's always a stigma attached sometimes with people that get to a certain level, they're a certain way. And I've just not experienced that with the ones that we've worked with. They just have more money. They're more successful or they're in the public eye. But they're genuinely, every single one that I've ever worked with has been just an awesome, nice, respectful person. And that goes from NBA players, NHL players, movie stars, pretty much you name it, a lot of athletes in Tampa, a lot, the wrestling crowd. We've come across all of that through the years and really never had one single bad experience. Hopefully that's helpful for you.